this morning already about their experiences, and we've been contacted by someone who has a connection with a school in Barwell in Leicestershire. So here's an example. You were talking about how it's going to work in practice. The school went back on the 25th of August, so a little earlier than some in England. Yesterday, school had 12 COVID cases, 300 in the school, now reintroducing bubbles already. What does that tell you?
Well, firstly, what we sort of set this out, and we set this out before the sort of summer holidays, is actually the need for children to isolate, along with those adults who are double jabbed, will not be a requirement. We've lifted the requirement on schools to do the testing and tracing themselves. That will be done by Test and Trace organisation itself. If a child is contacted by Test and Trace because they've had contact, that doesn't mean to say that they will be missing school. It will just be giving advice to have a PCR test, but they're able to continue to be in that school environment. And what we're wanting to do is to have that normality as much as possible. But we do have a contingency plan of where there will have to be, working with local public health teams, where there are measures that have to be put in place. It's right that we have those precautionary measures there. But what is key is children are not going to be having to isolate away from school, and they're not going to be missing more time in the classroom, as sadly so many were in a position of having to miss time in the classroom in the last academic year.
Well, I mean, you can use a phrase for it like contingency plans, but the reality is it's disruption, isn't it? I mean, the example I gave you a moment ago, already that is disruption, and it is precisely the thing that parents and students themselves are fearful of. They've had so much of it, and what people are worried about is there's a real risk, because of the relaxation of all the restrictions around social distancing and other things, that this could be the perfect storm. I'll give you another example. A teacher got in touch with us this morning saying, very practical, and this is what it boils down to: I have no windows and no ventilation in my classroom. What is the government doing to ensure all schools are compliant? So here's the room. There is a certain number of pupils coming in. There are no windows and there's no ventilation. What then?
So what we've done all the way through this pandemic is look at how we can support schools best to be able to reopen. Of course, there's a massive difference, as you're well aware, between schools returning in September of this year compared to schools returning either in March earlier on this year or in September last year, is where the whole adult population has been offered not just one vaccine but two vaccines. So those who are working in schools have had the opportunity to be double vaccinated, and that's the biggest difference. That is why we're able to take these steps in order to be able to open up schools, lift restrictions, both.
Okay, I'm just going to bring it back to the question, if I may. I'm just going to, for the first time, I'm going to try and get you to concentrate just on the question, which is a room. I want you to talk about that room, that teacher. A room with no windows and no ventilation. The wider issues are one thing. I want you to talk about that room and what happens next.
Well, as you're well aware, we're doing a whole set of measures, and of course the vaccine programme is the key reason why we can return.
Okay, give me three in relation to that
now,
teacher who's worried about that classroom.
As you'll appreciate, we're always looking at how we can improve the sort of security and the sort of striking that sensible balance towards getting children back into school, but also continuing to deal with a whole sort of global pandemic.
Okay, so I'm really trying, Gavin Williamson, I'm really trying to make sure that we don't end up talking over each other, but I'm very keen that you address that issue. So I have a teacher with a classroom with no ventilation and no windows. So you say you're looking at the wider issues, and I'm trying to work out what happens in that circumstance. Are you, for example, as the Education Secretary, say, do you know what, for the time being, don't use that room, because you cannot make that room compliant with the principles you're talking about. So, for example, that room, don't use it. Is that what you would advise?
So that's not what I'm saying, and that's why we've got a programme of CO2 monitors, because even though that room may not have windows that can open, it doesn't mean to say that there's a problem in terms of ventilation in that room. That's why we've got a programme of CO2 monitors.
Have the schools got those monitors yet?
sorry, I didn't hear you there.
Have the schools got those monitors today?
So they are being rolled out during this term. And of course, you know, it's a whole sort of, you know, we have to take that balanced approach. We're having to look at, you know, what's the impact in terms of the vaccine program suppressing, you know, whether it's the Delta variant or earlier variants, is how we're reducing the link between COVID and hospitalisations. And it's the fact that we've had that rollout of that program that means that we can take a different approach to schools. It means that we're able to lift restrictions, children are able to benefit from a more normal school experience. But we continue to have those, you know, those measures in place that we can introduce, and schools may have to introduce on the advice of public health teams if they're required across the, in areas of the country where there's higher rates. Because we don't want to see a position where schools are having to close, and we'd rather be in a place where we put additional measures into those schools than seeing children being sent home from those
just
schools.
On a technicality,
so
Mr. Williamson, can I just ask you, the CO2 monitors, I mean, why haven't the schools got them? Now is when the schools are reopening. I don't understand. I literally don't understand. You knew when term started. Why haven't they got them?
So it's part of a programme that we
you said it before. Why isn't it now?
And actually, the programme of vaccination, the fact that the vaccination is actually suppressing the virus and having such a big impact, we're rolling out the CO2 monitors as an extra layer of support for schools. And it's just an extra thing that we're doing for schools to make sure things run as smoothly as possible.
The rollout of vaccinations for 12 to 15-year-olds, what's your personal opinion on that?
Well, personally, I think parents would, and speakers